Warning: the following video may contain content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Number 1. Frog Boys. On March 26, 1991, in South Korea, it was a national holiday due to the local elections. It was on this day that 5 young boys from Daegu, South Korea, went to the streams of Mount Warryong nearby to catch frogs and salamanders in the stream. If a wrong turn is taken, it can be easy to get lost in the forest, which masks the steepness of the mountainside. The group consisted of 13-year-old Woo Chol-won, 12-year-old Jo Ho-yeon, 11-year-old Kim Yong-gyu, 10-year-old Pak Chan-in, and 9-year-old Kim Jong-sik. All 5 of the boys attended Song-so Elementary School. The boys lived only a short distance away from the mountain, and they knew the area well. So, it was not a concern for their parents when they went to explore and catch frogs to enjoy their day off from school. However, that evening, the boys did not come back home, which led their parents to report them missing. But local police and townspeople were unable to find any traces of the boys. The disappearance of the young boys eventually became national news as the search for them intensified. It was then that the boys became known as the Salamander Boys, or more famously, the Frog Boys. The president at the time, President Roh Tae-woo, heard about the disappearance and ordered 300,000 police officers to aid in the search for the missing boys. Over 8 million flyers were then distributed throughout the whole of South Korea, and a 42 million won reward, around $35,000, was donated by multiple groups, companies, and individuals. The Find the Frog Children campaign was created by local school children, and milk cartons started to carry photographs of the young boys. It was suspected that perhaps the group may have run away in an attempt to have an adventure. This led to many of the parents quitting their jobs so that they could search the country with a hope of finding their sons. Bus terminals and stations were also thoroughly searched nationwide. Many theories were constructed by the public, including that they may have been abducted by aliens, been kidnapped by North Korea, been killed and buried by their parents, been kidnapped by South Korean authorities to aid in medical science, or perhaps even kidnapped by a mentally ill person. Mount Warryong and the area surrounding it was searched over 500 times, but to no avail. The police also received many leads. However, there were over 550 false leads reported. Although the police received an anonymous call from a man who claimed, "I have kidnapped the boys for an exchange of ransom and they're dying of malnutrition." The investigators finally believed they had a solid lead, but after further investigation, they found that the man's claims had been false. On September 26, 2002, 11 years after the initial disappearance of the boys, 2 men were wandering through Mount Warryong. One of the men was identified as Choi Hwan-tae, who stated he was picking acorns. He found children's shoes and clothing remains, which he immediately reported to the police. The children's clothes were tied in knots. Investigators immediately began a search of the surrounding area and came across human remains in a ditch. A police associate stated, "The bodies are the missing boys, as 5 bodies were found together, and the shoes are those of the missing children." Dental braces were also found on one of the bodies, which was presumed to be the body of 12-year-old Jo Hoo Yeon. In shock at the news, his mother said, "I cannot remember whether my son had braces or not." The bodies of the 5 children were found huddled together in a shallow pit, which led police to the conclusion that the boys had been huddling for warmth and had died of hypothermia. The police decided that they were not dealing with a homicide and that the boys had probably gotten lost and died due to exposure to the cold. The parents of the boys, however, suspected that there had been foul play because the group had only been about 2 kilometers away from their homes and would have been able to see lights and hear traffic from their location. Also, the area in which they had been found had been searched multiple times before, and there appeared to be holes in their skulls. However, police still stated, "We have not found any reason to suspect that the Frog Boys were murdered." The parents of the Frog Boys did not believe that their sons had died due to hypothermia. They demanded that there be a more in-depth investigation. The bodies had been lying in a water gully and had been water exposed. This led to moss growing in their skulls, suggesting they had been hastily buried. When officials gave in and started a proper investigation, it was revealed that the investigation and evidence had not been handled in the correct manner. This led to evidence being damaged. Further analysis of the bodies showed that the boys all had some sort of damage to the skull. Investigators found marks on 3 of the 5 skulls that appeared to be created by blows with metal objects, possibly a tool of some kind. After 6 weeks of forensic investigation, it was tentatively concluded that the boys were murdered. The 3 skulls were caved in and showed a number of sharp cracks and holes, the investigator said, suggesting blunt force trauma, implying that the boys had been beaten to death with a blunt object. 2 of the skulls also had traces of blood on them, and one of the skulls had 2 bullet holes in it, believed to be from a shotgun. Near the scene, police found 2 1-centimeter long empty shells and a 5-centimeter long loaded shell. However, it is unclear whether they were related to the case because of the existence of a shooting practice field near the site. It is also unclear whether the boys had taken off their clothes themselves, or if someone else had done so, or if they had deteriorated naturally due to the weather and passing of time. A day before the bodies of the boys had been found, an anonymous call had been made to a newspaper on which a man stated, "You will find remains of the 5 Frog Boys in Mount Warryong." However, it is unclear whether this was looked into further after the bodies were found. Police suspected that perhaps bullies from school or a mentally ill person may have murdered them, but no one was ever arrested. It is suspected that the murder was not premeditated. However, it is believed it could have been premeditated due to the fact that necessary tools would have been needed to dispose of the bodies in the mountainside. On March 25th, 2004, the bodies of the 5 boys were finally buried. Their skulls were donated for medical research. Park Gyeon-soo, the father of Park Chan-in, stated, "I am crushed by a new kind of grief, but it was good to see the absurd argument of the police that they froze to death disproved if their killers have any conscience, they must be suffering tremendously by now. Rites were also held at the location where the bodies were found. It is unknown if that is where the boys were killed. In 2006, the case reached South Korea's 15-year statute of limitation on murder, which stopped the murder investigation, and it meant that no one could be prosecuted for the murder. However, in July 2015, this statute was removed and the investigation was started again. But no one has been able to find the person or persons responsible. Even now, nearly 3 decades later, the 5 boys have not had the justice they deserve. There is still hope, and every year, the school the boys attended holds a ceremony in their memory. Number 2. Lam Bun. In 1947, China was still under the British colonial rule. The Hong Kong 1967 leftist riots are remembered for the violence committed by the leftists demonstrating against the British rule. They resorted to planting real and fake bombs in the city and even murdering members of the press who spoke out against the left. At the time, 52 people are known to have died and around 800 were injured. During this time, commercial Radio Hong Kong was highly critical of the left and their agendas. One of the radio commentators, Lam Bun, was very critical of leftist agitators. He even created a satirical program called Can't Stop Striking, and this led him to be labelled a running dog and traitor by leftist media outlets. For many months, members of the left wing protested against Lam, and posters were put up threatening him with punishment, and commercial radio became the #1 enemy of the left extremists. On August 2nd, 1967, a letter was published in Wen Wei Po which went on to criticize Lam, stating that he was degenerating into bad elements of the nation, that his program was glorifying the Hong Kong British authorities' atrocities and slandering the patriotic compatriots. Commercial radio has acted against the Chinese and Hong Kong people and has shamelessly served as the mouthpiece of the Hong Kong British authorities. It should think about its own future. Then, on August 24th, 1967, a short while after 9 a.m, Lam Bun and his cousin, Lam Kwang Hoi, were driving to commercial radio from their flat on Waterloo Road in Lam's Volkswagen. On their way, the duo was stopped by 3 men who were dressed as road repairmen. The men waved red flags in front of the car, urging the men to stop. It is believed that one of the 3 men threw a petrol bomb into Lam's car, which immediately caused the vehicle to burst into flames. Then, Lam and his cousin stumbled out of the car, which was now ablaze. This is when the cousins were doused in petrol and set alight. The 2 men were rushed to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Unfortunately, neither of the men survived long before succumbing to their burns. Lam Bun died the next day on August 25th at only 37 years old, leaving behind a wife and 3 daughters. They are believed to have relocated to France after the attack. Lam's cousin, Lam Kwang Hoi, passed away 6 days after the ambush on August 30th. Commercial radio stated there was a 100,000 Hong Kong dollar reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Later, A 50,000 Hong Kong dollar reward was also offered by police. However, to this day, no one has ever been convicted of the murders. It is believed that the attack was related to Lam's criticism of the left. On the 24th of August, the managing director of commercial radio, Ho Ho Chi, stated he condemned the atrocities committed by the thugs. The thugs are obviously scared about commercial radio's exposure of their sabotage of peace in Hong Kong and employed this bloody measure to intimidate our staff. But the leftist thugs' atrocities could not change the righteous stance of our radio station and staff. We will spare no effort to help the government quell the disturbance. Even after his death, leftist media referred to Lam as an anti-China spy. From September 8, 1967, notices from the Underground Sudden Attack Squad claimed they were responsible for Lam Bun's death, claiming they were executing national discipline. The notice stated, Lam Bun, a bad element of the nation, had been hostile to our great socialist motherland and served as a running dog for the US and British imperialism. He spared no efforts in smearing patriotic compatriots who bravely resisted persecution by the Hong Kong British authorities. Despite repeated warnings from our patriotic compatriots, Lam remained unrepentant and continued to follow the footsteps of enemies. By doing so, he alienated himself from the Chinese people in order to uphold national discipline by executing Lam on August 24th. Even though no one was ever arrested, it was believed that Yong Kwong, who was a riot leader at the time, as well as the chairman of the Federation of Trade Unions and director of the All Circles Anti-Persecution Struggle Committee, was the one who had ordered Lam's murder. Although many believe the left should not be held responsible for the death, Lam Bun became a symbol for freedom of speech for the people. Bun's address, 18F, Block C, was a program on commercial radio in Lam's memory. Unfortunately, his attackers have never been punished. Number 3. The Geylang Bahru family murders. On January 6, 1979, in Singapore, in a Geylang Bahru Housing and Development Board flat, the Tan family appeared to be having a normal day. Tan Kon Chai and Lee Mei Yin operated a minibus service to get children to school in the mornings. This bus service seemed to be the only financial support for the family of 6. At 6:35 a.m, the parents left their apartment for work, leaving behind their 4 young children who were still sleeping. This included 3 boys, 10-year-old Tan Kok Peng, 8-year-old Tan Kok Hin, and 6-year-old Tan Kok Soon, and the only daughter of the family, 5-year-old Tan Chin Ni. At 7:10 a.m, their mother called the children, like she normally did, to wake them up for school. The 3 boys attended primary school, whilst their sister was still in kindergarten. She called them 3 times, however no one answered any of her calls. This then led their mother to contact one of their neighbours to help go and wake the children up. However, when the neighbour knocked on their door, there was still no reply from any of the children. Then, at 10 a.m, the Tans arrived home. The children's school bags were on the table, but there appeared to be no sign of the children. Mrs. Tan went into the bathroom and was met with a gruesome sight. There in front of her lay the slashed and bloody bodies of her 4 children piled on top of one another. All 4 of the children were wearing t-shirts with trousers, and all of them had slash wounds on their heads. Each child had suffered a minimum of 20 slashes to their bodies. The daughter also had slash marks to the face, and the oldest son's right arm had almost been completely severed. The eldest son, Tan Kok Peng, was also found to be holding pieces of hair, suspected to have belonged to the attacker, and it appeared that he had put up quite a fight. Although the fragments of hair had been left behind, the attacker had been very careful not to leave evidence behind. There were bloodstains found in the kitchen sink, and it is believed the attacker had cleaned themselves up before leaving the site of the crime. Investigators found no sign of forced entry into the apartment, so it was believed that the murderer was someone known to the children. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment, and it had not been ransacked either. There were 2 suspected weapons, a dagger and a chopper. The chopper was believed to have been taken from the kitchen. However, neither of the murder weapons have ever been found. It does not appear that the hair found was ever tested for DNA due to a lack of forensics at the time. Police did believe that the murders had been premeditated, most probably by someone close to the Tan family. In the following days, police proceeded to interview over 100 of the Tan family's relatives, friends, neighbours, and acquaintances. On January 7th, 1979, the police took 2 women into custody and questioned them. However, they were released a short while later. Investigators never stated whether the 2 women were of any help. Mrs. Tan's brother suggested that the murderers may have been related to an illegal tontine scheme. This led police to believe the attacker may have been a gambler out for revenge. However, this theory was denied by the Tans, who denied having any known enemies. The police were finding it difficult to find any useful leads. One of the neighbours, 68-year-old Yam Yin Tin, usually sat in the corridor in the mornings to watch the children play. However, on that day she claimed she was washing her hair at the time, so she did not see anyone near the Tan residence. Residents in the area claim to have seen a man who witnessed Tan Chin Ni struggling with a man, but investigators were unable to find the witness. A witness also claimed to have seen a man and a woman leave the scene of the murder, and that one of them was covered in blood, but investigators found it to be a hoax. Even the children's parents were questioned by police, but they did not seem to know much either. About 2 weeks after the murder, the Tans received a Chinese New Year card. On the card was a picture of happy children playing, and the message on the card was, "Now you can have no more offspring, ha ha ha," and it was signed by the murderer. It is unclear whether the card was a hoax, but it was clear that it was from someone close to the Tans, due to the fact that it was addressed to Ah Chai and Ah Eng, which are the nicknames of the Tans. The sender also appeared to have knowledge of the fact that Mrs. Tan had been sterilized after the birth of their youngest, a very personal detail. The closest lead the police appeared to have gotten to solving the murder came from a taxi driver from To Pyo. The man claimed to have picked up a man in his 20s near the location of the murder at around 8 a.m. near block 96 along Geylang Bahru Road. The taxi driver stated the man walked with a lurch and had bloodstains on the left side of his body. The man was also carrying a knife that banged against the taxi door. Mr. Tan linked the description to one of his neighbours who was very close to the Tan family. The Malaysian man would regularly use the Tan family's phone, and the children all referred to him as Uncle. The police created a lineup for the taxi driver, and he picked out the Malaysian uncle. Unfortunately, the police could only hold him for 2 weeks due to a lack of evidence. They had to release the man. After he was released from police custody, the man moved away with his sister. On January 7th, 1979, the 4 Tan children were buried with their school bags, books, and toys. Mrs. Tan reportedly lost consciousness multiple times as her children were laid to rest. Soon after the tragedy, the Tans gave up on their minibus business and began working at a plastic bag machining firm. 5 years after the murder, Mrs. Tan was able to reverse her sterilization and even registered with an adoption agency. On December 30th, 1983, Mrs. Tan gave birth and they welcomed a baby boy into their lives. However, the Tans have referred to their home in an interview as 4 walls of emptiness. The culprit or culprits have never been caught. Hello everyone, SinisterShaf here. Please like and subscribe for more like this. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Links are in the description box below. If you have any cases you would like me to cover, just leave me a comment. I try my best to reply to all comments. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay sinister.